start recording here. Okay, everyone, welcome to the Pangburn Q&A. Our guest today is Dr. Deepak Chopra. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation we just had. And it's time for you guys to have a chance to ask your questions. I want to start with Doolittle. You're up, my friend.
Holy cow! Hey, thanks, Deepak, for coming in and doing this. It's a rare opportunity for someone like me to get to ask questions of someone like you. So feel really privileged. I guess I want to give you more of an open-ended question. I'm a big fan of positive thinking, and I was really inspired by a lot of your earlier work a few decades ago with, when you were talking about quantum healing and things like that. I did really notice in my life that positive mindset has a big difference in someone's well-being and whether they're suffering or getting to live life in a healthy manner. And I was wondering, if you could give us an updated take, given what we've learned about epigenetics in the last few decades. How does the mind affect the cellular biology, and how does our cellular biology affect the mind? And what can we do to make our lives better using that?
And Deepak, you are muted, just FYI. I know it's a hard platform to get used to. There you go.
What's happening, guys?
Oh yeah, no, you're good now.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
we can hear you.
I heard the question.
Okay.
Is there any more to it? Do you want to ask it? Are you done with the question?
Yeah,
Is it Jimmy?
that was the whole question. Yeah.
Okay. So there's something called learned optimism that I believe in, but in general, I don't believe in forced positive thinking because, if you're forcing yourself to think positively all the time, you'll be stressed. I mean, I believe in more reflective thinking. And when I say reflective, I mean quietening the mind in meditation and then asking very fundamental questions. Who am I? Am I the changing body? Am I the awareness of the changing body? Am I the changing mind? Am I the awareness in which I've experienced the changing mind? What do I want for myself? For the world? What am I grateful for? Do I have a higher calling? That kind of reflective self-inquiry and a quiet mind is much more effective than a positive mind. A positive mind can be a stressed mind. So I do believe that people who have learned optimism and learned to interpret what they're perceiving and question their perceptions and question their certainties. We all have habitual certainties. The moment we start to question our habitual certainties, a window opens up. And that window is what we call insight. So to me, insight, inspiration, a higher vision, desire to help the world, that's much more gratifying and much more effective than forcing yourself to think positive thoughts. I hope that makes sense.
Doolittle, did you have any follow up?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the way that I have learned optimism is a lot like what you said with meditation and asking myself the question of what can I do today to make the world a better place. That's a question that I ask myself every day, and and that helps me see the world as what it could be, and then to focus my actions on trying to make it.
Yeah, so this is a clue to meditation. Is not positive thinking. Meditation is a quiet mind. Okay, and when you ask questions in a quiet mind, you get clearer insight, and you start to question your what I call habitual certainties, because life essentially is ambiguous. It's full of paradox, it's full of contradiction, it's full of ambiguity. In fact, Freud said the definition of neurosis, I think he said, is the inability to tolerate ambiguity.
Interesting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Doolittle. Let's go to John Parker next. You're up, John, also known as Delta.
I hope not the variant.
I'm sorry, I've not been able to hear Deepak the entire time.
Oh, really? Try
yeah.
try leaving, John, and joining back.
All right, I'll leave and come back.
Yeah.
Just move on to the next person in the meantime.
Yeah, we'll move to Symmetry next. Symmetry, you're up, brother. We can't.
It's really awesome.
Symmetry, try again with your mic. Get nice and close. You should try reconnecting as well.
Just send me a telepathic question.
So let's move to Jimmy. Jimmy, you're up.
All right. Can everybody hear me?
You bet.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for taking this time, Deepak, to speak with us.
Yes,
so I was very intrigued in the conversation when you brought up that you no longer felt the need to be right about everything. And that really connected with me because the last 4 or 5 years I've ran up against some health problems. And so that's kind of shifted the way I look at the world and my axioms. So I wanted to ask you, at what point in your life did you feel the need to be right as something to be given up? And was this something that came with age or as a sequence of events for you?
Both. So, I'm a student of Buddhism, and the Eightfold Path to Enlightenment in Buddhism is one of them is called right perspective. And then the Buddha says, right perspective is either no perspective or all perspectives. So I knew that all my life, but I just didn't follow it. And at a certain point, I realized that all the anguish that I was experiencing is because I wanted to be right. And so I asked myself, do I want to be right or do I want to enjoy life? And the answer was obvious. And I just made that commitment only less than a decade ago. So it's very recent. I mean, as a kid in India growing up, I went to a Catholic missionary school and debating, we were a Cambridge University outlet in India, remote India colonial empire. And debating was a big discipline in our school. And I was a very intense debater. It doesn't matter what side, I remember there was a debate called, in the opinion of the House, Christopher Columbus went too far. And so I was asked to choose which side, and I said any side is fine. But I always wanted to win. And then at a certain point, I realized winning is not happiness. So it's recent.
Okay, and then you may have already hinted to it, but I had a follow-up. What freedom has this given you personally to make that conscious decision?
It has given me a deep insight that existence, or what we call awareness, spontaneously takes care of itself. That's a very difficult concept, but what I've realized is the less I do, the more I accomplish. I've lost a sense of personal agency. So, or to some extent, Travis mentioned that we don't have free will. From a mechanistic point of view, that's true. We don't. We are conditioned by the collective conditioned mind, whatever it is, the cultural mind. What I see as religion is cultural mythology. And what I see as science is current mythology, because science, at least the vast majority of scientists, think that science is an avenue to the truth, but science is a good map towards the truth. Nothing is truth other than existence and awareness of existence. So what I should say is the way it's changed my life is much more joyful. I do feel that I have choice, even it may be an illusion. And at the same time, paradoxically, even though I feel I have choice, I don't feel a sense of personal agency, because I think everything is evolving as it is, and everybody in the world, even the worst people that we think in the world, are doing their best from their level of awareness. So I would say peace, equanimity, and joy.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Jimmy. Let's move to Michaela next. Michaela, you're up.
Hi, Dr. Chopra.
Hi.
So I suppose my question would be, listening to the conversation earlier and to your answers to the previous question, it's clearly obvious to me that that you are, as you say, a student of Buddhism, and I think what you're describing, what comes to mind for me is Zen meditation and koans.
Yes.
And I know that you have had your disagreements with Sam Harris, and I think that you might agree with him on a lot of things. I wondered if you ever. I wondered if you two share a similar style of meditation. It seems like you do, and if you're knowing that, could maybe elucidate to you that you're more alike than you maybe think.
Yeah, partly right. But let me tell you what currently people talk about meditation, as Sam Harris does, and as to, the fashionable word right now is mindfulness. And actually, it's a misnomer, because it has nothing to do with mind. Meditation has nothing to do with mindfulness. Implies a full mind, and I don't like that. It's my personal take on it. So, and awarefulness would be a clumsy word. So I'll go with mindfulness. So mindfulness is the first Buddhist meditation, but Buddha didn't call it mindfulness. What he called it was insight meditation. Insight means kind of some insight that reveals some kind of truth to you. So here's the Buddha's experience. I'll just give it to you straight as it comes from the Buddhist tradition. The Buddha is closing his eyes and he's observing his breath. And what he realizes is that we don't really breathe. In a sense, we're being breathed. You're not trying to breathe. It's happening. So that's one thing. Breath is spontaneous. But then he also realizes that as the breath arises first, and before it rises, there's no sensation. As it arises, there's a sensation. Then it subsides. And so the Buddha's first conclusion, just by observing his breath, which is fascinating, was if it is of the nature of arising, it is also the nature of subsiding. So from this, he derived the law of impermanence. He said, nothing is permanent. Every experience is a sensation. It arises, it is experienced, then it subsides. And if you hold on to your breath, then you will suffocate. But then he went on further. He said that's true of every sensation. Every sensation arises, it's experienced, it subsides. Every perception arises, it exists, it subsides. Every thought arises, it exists, subsides. When you realize this, you stop grasping and clinging at experiences that are ephemeral, spontaneous, ungraspable, evanescent, and impermanent. So there he derived the philosophy of impermanence, let go and flow. So this became what we call mindfulness. But mindfulness is not only of the breath, it can be of sensations, it can be perception, it can be a thought on the nature of relationship, on the connection to the cosmos, and ultimately which we call awareness of awareness, which is non-symbolic awareness. Non-symbolic awareness means there's no interpretation or inference. So if I asked you, what's this? Because this is a symbol, you'd say it's an iPhone. But before you can say it's an iPhone, it's an experience. And before it's an experience, it's happening in you. And also, it's an impermanent experience. I'm showing it to you, now it's not there. So with insight meditation, Buddha had amazing revelations. That's not the only kind of meditation. There's also something called self-inquiry. There's self-reflection, there's contemplation, there's concentration, there's visualization, there is the creation of images, and there is transcendence. Transcendence means a totally silent mind, no symbolic representation, and that is called pure awareness. Pure awareness means there's no inference, there's no interpretations, there's direct experience. And when you have direct experience of what we call objects, you'll sooner or later during these practices realize that what we call objects are actually our perceptions. And that's all they are. And those perceptions are modifications of our mind, which in turn is influenced by the cultural mind. So in fact, there is no objective world. What we call objects are ways of thinking, ways of seeing, ways of perceiving. They are species specific. They're also culture specific. I'll give you an example. When I was in 1969, I was a resident in a village in India. And one day, I used to work with patients that were totally uneducated, that came from, culturally never read a book, never heard of science, totally captivated in their world of mythology. And so one day they brought a patient to me and they said he needs a psych examination. So I said, why? This is, remember, 1969. So this kid, he's 14 years old, he's totally crazy. I said, why do you think he's crazy? He just came from Delhi and he says there are men walking on the moon. I said, he's right. He heard on the radio that men walk on the moon. So he's right. He says, but we worship the moon every day as a goddess. Okay, so I started to think about that. So, we had a little meeting. So I said the moon, Armstrong and these people are walking in the moon is true. Moon is a little whatever satellite of planet Earth. But then somebody said we've been worshipping the moon, and it gives us great solace when we think of the moon and the moonlight and the romance of the moon and the songs that are written around the moon and all the plays around the moon. So I said, well, that's a different moon. And then I started to think of myself, what's a horseshoe moon? The horseshoes, crabs in the depths of the ocean, they have no sight of the moon. Yet on a full moon night, they come up to the surface and they mate. What is the moon to a horseshoe crab? I have no idea. So is there a moon? Yeah, there are infinite moons, depending on how you construct the moon in your consciousness. Meditation allows you to see these perspectives so that you don't necessarily become a militant atheist or a militant fundamentalist or a militant anything.
What do you think, Michaela?
I think I have a lot of questions. I'm glad that I've found something upon which I can agree with you. Meditation certainly is interesting, and it's extremely useful. I think it's a skill everyone should learn.
But by now, there are about... Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I already forgot. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No.
There are tens of thousands of peer-reviewed publications in meditation. We recently published a paper in Nature Scientific Reports with the Nobel laureate, Elizabeth Blackburn. She had no idea what meditation was. I invited her to a retreat. I said, measure telomerase, which is the enzyme that controls the telomere lengths. And in 1 week of meditation retreat, the telomerase level went up by 40%. And then we had other researchers. Elizabeth is a Nobel laureate, but we had researchers from Harvard, we had researchers from Mount Sinai, we had researchers from Duke, Scripps. So one of our researchers was presenting all the data on genetic expression and meditation. And so somebody in the audience, and I have no qualms mentioning his name. His name is Eric Schott. He was one of the top known geneticists at Mount Sinai in New York. So somebody said to Dr. Schott, do you meditate? He said, no. He said, do you plan to meditate? No. You just showed us this data that, telomerase goes up by 40% and gene activity goes up in the direction of self-regulation and homeostasis, and genes that are responsible for inflammation go down. So why would you not meditate? He said, well, I'm going to figure out how to make a drug out of this. And he did. He left his job at Mount Sinai with a drug company. He's looking at the metabolic pathways to see how he can replicate meditation through chemicals. Well, that's how we do, we also do that with depression, antidepressants, serotonin, opiate uptake inhibitors. So there's a role for everything, but I can say one thing: reductionism, which is identifying this particular thing, ignores what is happening in the totality of a biological organism. Right now, many things are happening in my biological organism. Trillions of things. They're all happening simultaneously. They're all correlated. There's no physical explanation for that other than, goofy explanation from Deepak, quantum entanglement. Don't believe Deepak. So we'll ignore that explanation. But there's no explanation for the simultaneity of an organism. And by looking at one activity of that organism, calling it a thing, because a molecule is not a thing. A molecule is a verb. It's an activity, and it's an activity in awareness. How do you know there's a molecule? Because you're aware of it. So, these are complex questions, but there's value in every single perspective in science as well. And right now, science is going through its own crisis because reductionism doesn't work in the long run. It works. Like if you have acute situations in medicine, then antibiotics, surgery, whatever, appendicitis, you get your appendix out, it works. Chronic situations, now we know that 95% of disease-related gene mutations are not fully penetrant. Let me explain what that means. Only 4 to 5% of genetic mutations actually guarantee the disease. So if somebody has a gene like, say, Angelina Jolie has, which is called a BRCA gene, it predicts breast cancer. So she actually very correctly, rightfully, had a preventive mastectomy because she was going to get breast cancer. Now, as we speak, there are technologies like CRISPR, where you'll be able to cut and paste a gene in the same way as you do emails. So you'll be able to read the barcode of a gene, delete the defective gene, and insert the healthy gene. Disease is cured. Yes, but 5% or less. And my geneticist friends say that 95 plus genetic mutations, and I'm not talking about Delta, the COVID-19 mutations. I'm talking about mutations that cause cancer, or mutations that cause heart disease, or mutations that cause Alzheimer's. 95% are not fully penetrant. For example, there are 40 genes associated with Alzheimer's, only 3 are predictive. There are hundreds of genes associated with cancer, only 5% are fully penetrant. So we have to rethink everything now. And what we're rethinking is the science of epigenetics, which says every gene changes the activity of your genes. You can't change your genes. You got them. Like a deck of cards, your parents gave you 25,000 genes. You can't change them. But you have 99% of the genes or more in your body are not human. They are microbial. You can change them just by diet. You can change them through vagal stimulation. So we have new frontiers right now, and reductionist medicine, as we knew it, the way I was educated. You see, I went to medical school. The first thing you see is a dead body, anatomy. So you think of the body as a physical thing. Then you do physiology and you realize it's not a physical thing, it's a process. Then you do biochemistry, you realize it's chemistry. Then you do biophysics, you realize it's physics. Then you do math and you realize it's math. And in the end, you realize it's all made up. That it was all a construct, but it works. So why not?
All right. Thank you, Michaela. I want to jump to Symmetry. Let's try your mic again. Symmetry, are you there?
Yeah, I'm trying.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, you're great.
Okay, cool. Excellent.
I can hear you.
Awesome. I was gonna say I really appreciated the talk between you two. I thought it was wonderful. And Deepak, I agree with, metaphorically or otherwise, I agree with you about 80% of the things you say. So I really appreciate listening to you. I've followed you for a while. I've read your book, Meta Human. I really enjoyed the book, Meta Human. It was really interesting. I've had a lot of kind of similar to Jimmy, but a little different. I've had a lot of meditative and hallucinogenic experiences in my life. And the way, you were talking in the talk about how everything is a phenomenal experience. Nothing is actual numinous reality that all scientists and mathematicians are seeking, So I have had these kind of experiences, some of the things that you've talked about in these meditative and hallucinogenic experiences. Is there a point to seek real reality?
Yes, there is a point to seek real reality so you're not bamboozled by your constructs, even though they work. So there is a reason. And bring you up hallucinogens particularly. Say how we use words. So when psychedelics first came into prominence in the 1970s, they were called hallucinogens. Then they were called psychedelics. Some people are recently calling them entheogens, E-N-T-H-O, because they give a religious experience or so-called religious experience. What I'm realizing, and I had my first LSD experience at the age of 17 in medical school because we had students from Harvard and we were all experimenting, and our professor was very, very tolerant. So he said, let's do a group meditation and a hallucinogenic experience. And you know what? I suddenly had this experience when I realized that everything I was seeing normally was a hallucination. And what the psychedelic was doing was taking out the editing of the hallucination so I could see what was real. And now, I just interviewed on my podcast Michael Pollan, who's written this book. He's a New York Times best-selling author, but he's a journalist. And I trust journalists sometimes more than I trust scientists because they are, they're still questioning, they're still skeptical. Mm-hmm. But all the science shows now that when you take psychedelics, but it doesn't matter, LSD, ketamine, mushrooms, what happens is that there's a part of the brain called the default mode network. And the default mode network is where all your conditioned responses are housed. It's where you think you are right. That's what I was telling you. It's the ego identity. The neurological correlate of that is called the default mode network. And all the data shows that when people are given these psychedelics, the activity of the default mode network goes down, sometimes almost to nothing. So you have no editing. You see reality as it is without giving it construct. And when you see reality as it is, all you experience is colors, shapes, forms, sounds, flavors, fragrances, textures, and no objects. It's like, if you want to use a word for that, the word is qualia, a quality of experience without inference. And that's very liberating because that's what happens in near-death experiences as well. People have something called gamma frequency in the brain, and they lose their so-called individual identity because the individual identity was provisional to begin with.
Okay.
Thanks for the
that's excellent
question, Symmetry. I want to go to Dal2. Dal2, do you have a question for Dr. Chopra?
Yeah, I was gonna ask something like, is it the affirmation that I am correct that is the that is the dogma or the issue that's getting in the way, or is it the denial of the other interpretations of the truth that's in the way?
Affirmation and I am Deepak Chopra is what leads to all hallucination and disconnection from reality. What is Deepak Chopra? It's a name. How was it decided? provisionally. I could, if I was born in Calcutta, in Bangladesh, I would be maybe called Hassan. If I was maybe in Detroit, maybe they would have called me David. So it's an arbitrary choice. But then attached to the name is every single thing I do. I'm a doctor, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a physician, I'm a writer, I am a debater. All those are things I'm identifying with provisional experiences, which are really very selective. They're fragmentary, but somehow I attach themselves. I'm this and I'm not that. So the only affirmation, by the way, that's worth saying is, I am. And don't qualify it, and there you'll be peace. And that, by the way, that affirmation, I am that I am, is found in every spiritual tradition. Judaic, Christian, when Moses asked the burning bush, God, what's your name? The bush responds, I am that I am. Jesus Christ says, before Abraham was, I am. In the Vedanta says, if you can attach anything to I am, it's false. Anything you attach to I am, it's false because it's provisional. It's selective. You identify with certain things, certain opinions, you don't. But when you say I am, you're treating as close to possible the truth of existence. I exist and I'm aware of existence. The rest is a story. What story appeals to you? And what story is most useful for humanity at this present moment? Today's story that is most practical is science. But remember that science being a methodology can be used for divine or diabolical purposes. We now have all the science to reverse climate change, resurrect the microbiome, actually reverse many things, including understanding why these mutations are occurring when we understand the big context. The context means climate change, eco-destruction, entangled species, genetic information, microbiome. If we understand all this, we can reverse what's happening. But we are so stuck with our opinions that we don't actually solve these problems. Social scientists, social science is a whole different science. They say if you have shared vision, let's say the shared vision is a peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, joyful world, climate change, whatever. You have shared vision, you have maximum diversity of opinion, you have maximum diversity of education, you have maximum diversity of scientists, maximum diversity of philosophers, maximum diversity of musicians, storytellers, entertainers, educators. You will have emergence. You will break the old story and you'll create a new story which has a chance of resurrecting our humanity. And that's why I call the book Meta-Human, because I think humans are insane, totally. And if we don't agree that they're insane, then we're declaring our insanity as well. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, I totally agree with a lot of what you said. I think I kind of want to try to narrow it down because I think what I was trying to ask was with language, there's this natural dichotomy that forms between, like, if I was to say this, like, I am Dao Tzu, that means that other things are not Dao Tzu. But, like, if we were to somehow break that language constraint so that by me being Dao Tzu, that doesn't mean I'm not Deepak Chopra necessarily. I just might be less Deepak Chopra than I am Dao Tzu, or whatever explanation there might be. Do you think that might be a method of getting through this rather than denying the scientific materialist worldview as correct?
Well, you can take any worldview, but what you pointed out right now is of the utmost importance. Language does not describe, language constructs. So, if I use a word, it actually constructs the experience, okay? I'll give you an example. Man goes to a primitive indigenous tribe where a person is dancing all by himself. And, a visitor is an anthropologist, scientist. He says, what are you doing this? Dancing all by myself. Dancing all by yourself. And the man responds, he says, what do you mean dancing by all by myself. I'm dancing with the universe. So, there's different ways we use our language, and language conceives, constructs, governs, and becomes our perceived reality. It becomes the moment we use the word, it becomes what is called the flesh. It gives a construct to something which is essentially a mystery. So I agree. Language is, and by the way, if you look up Wikipedia or whatever, I don't look up Wikipedia because they attack me all the time. But if you look up Wikipedia, what is the origin of language? At one time, this is a forbidden subject, even amongst evolutionary people. You talk to evolutionary biologists, say, what is the origin of language? No idea. In fact, it was a forbidden subject. We have no idea why we evolved languages. There's only one species that uses language the way we do. So up until 40,000 years ago, something occurred called the cognitive revolution. Somebody say 40,000 years, 60,000, it doesn't matter. But if you read Sapiens and that guy Harari, he says that about 40,000 years ago, there were 8 different kinds of human species, but all the human family. So we call ourselves Homo sapiens, which means the wise ones. And we were humbled enough to give us that name, but we gave names to the other humans, Homo florensis, Neanderthals, etc., etc. 8 different kinds. They all look like humans, just like lions and tigers and panthers and cats look the same, but they are one family. We call it the feline family. So humans are part of a human family, but many species. And according to these guys, the cognitive scientists, they say all species had language for danger, for sex, and for food, including humans. There's food there, there's sex there, and there's danger, survival. And one species, us, we developed a language for telling stories. We were the first storytellers, and we came up with constructs. The first construct, which governs the whole world right now, is called money. I mean, there's no such thing. It's just, I owe you this, you owe me this. Before that, you give me a haircut, and I'll cook you an omelet. But now it's too inconvenient, so let's come up with this concept called money, a piece of paper or a coin or a piece of shell. Now we have Wall Street, we have nation states, we have cryptocurrency, all made up. So it's not bad. Without language, we won't have human civilization. But now we confuse the map with the territory. We're trying to eat the menu instead of having the meal. The meal is experience. The menu is the construct. You can't eat the menu.
Mm.
And what interferes with the experience is language. That's what meditation is. It's going beyond language. Direct experience. When you look directly at an object, it's not to be found. All you can find is your perception.
Mm. I thank you, Dr. Chopra. Nivek, it's your opportunity to ask a question. Go ahead, Nivek. Guys, we have time for a few more questions. So, Nivek, you're up, and then maybe we'll check in with Bruce after that.
Yes. Hello, Doctor.
Hi.
A pleasure to talk to you.
Nice to meet you.
I have a question on race. Being that there can be a genetic compatibility with blood or organs, there's not a relatability along the lines of race there. Can race potentially evolve over time to be defined along other genetic forms of definitions, like a fat, skinny, or eye color race, and it also partially being a superficial social construct to divide, like feudal serfdom or caste was, that's more subjective in identity and how people are potentially viewed with a negative stigma attached that can lead over to there being another potential view in how it's defined in society. Do you have a different definition viewpoint from others in what's race? Is it really all about? Do you have a different definition viewpoint from others in what's race? Is it really about relatability of the minds between people socially in society who identify with one another?
Essentially, I agree with you. From a scientific perspective, all of us, irrespective of where we live in the world, irrespective of the color of skin we have, we all come from Africa, okay? All of us. We have the same genes. And then as a result of mass migrations, there was a first mass migration to Asia. So Asia separated from Africa earlier. And then there are mass migrations to the Western continents. And after that, everything is epigenetic. Epigenetic means the environment determines which genes get activated and which genes don't get activated. And this we know only recently. So actually, all racial division is artificial and another construct. And I know it's sad to say for me, because I was a hero worshiper of people like Watson and Crick. As you know, Watson and Crick discovered DNA, and recently it was in the public news that Watson was at least portrayed by the news as a racist. Crick died before the heart problem could be solved. He worked with two people, Don Hoffman and what's his name, the other scientist who runs the institute in Seattle. But Crick himself was very interested in consciousness. And as you know, the Nobel Prize should have actually gone to a woman who actually did the work for DNA. So it's very controversial. Just because somebody is brilliant in one thing, you shouldn't assume that they know everything. So I think genetics interpreted correctly would tell you there's no racial difference between any one of us, that it's all environmental over centuries, and we all have the same genes, and most of them are not even human.
Excellent. Thanks for the question, Nivek. We have a question from Iron Charioteer, who can't talk because I think they're at work, but they have a question. Do you think, Dr. Chopra, people should be living for the here and now, or should people be striving for the transcendental?
The here and now is the transcendental. Okay, that's all we experience. We experience the past, here and now, right? Where do you think of the past? Now. We experience the future, here and now. So, and what we call present is not a moment in time, because by the time you have the experience, it's already past. So there's no such thing as a present moment. There's only the timeless present, which is transcendent. And if you live there, you have access to infinite creativity, infinite imagination, because you're not bamboozled by the past, nor are you burdened by the future. It's the only way to live.
Thank you. Bruce, you're up.
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, sir.
So I had a question earlier, but you kind of broached something that I wanted to move to. So earlier you spoke of I am that I am, right? And so I'm kind of curious how you distinguish between classes and categories in any way, because in the biblical usage, the tautology is reserved for the creator, right? And so the tautology is the epistemological center. So how do you then justify your position saying that you are what you are as the only epistemological center for all the other oughts that you might hold?
I don't defend my epistemological interpretation. And if you read the Bible, which is an amazing mythical piece of literature, as are all religious texts, are cultural mythologies, you'll find many interpretations of every philosophy, every tautology. I choose to take the one I said, that the only thing I can be sure of is I exist and I'm aware of my existence, and everything else, if I have the same experiences as you, and I had the same culture as you, and the same indoctrination as you, then you and I will agree, and everybody else will disagree. So we agree with people who interpret reality the way we do. So I have no argument with what you're saying.
Okay, sure. Thanks for clearing it up.
Sure.
Let's go to John Parker. Is your mic working now?
Yes, and
okay.
I can see and hear Dr. Chopra.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I can.
All right, Dr. Chopra, I'm going to echo everybody else and say it's very nice to meet you, and I'm
Thank you,
privileged to have
sir.
this opportunity. I have a bajillion questions for you, and that's the technical term, but I'm just gonna ask one surrounding Buddhism. So I'm gonna let me know if I ever make a mistake because my knowledge of Buddhism is limited. But as far as I understand, one of the core tenets is non-discriminatory love and non-preference. You're supposed to love everybody equally as a valuable person. And from the books I've read of Buddhism, the Buddha seems to teach this. My issue with this is the Buddha himself, as far as I understand, had a wife and a son, and I'm curious how one could possibly have um, a monogamous partner and a child while also sticking to non-preferential love. I was wondering what you thought about that, if that still applies today, and how that kind of squares with our cultural norms of Western philosophy that are very into valuing certain people over others in terms of family relationships.
So, if this is more or less the last question, let me give you the context of it. Travis, can be more or less the last
Yeah,
question.
this is the last question. So
Okay, so let me give you a context. Okay, Buddha was born a prince to an emperor, and uh, at the time he was born, because of the various customs in the royal family, the astrologer said this kid is either going to be one of the greatest teachers in the world, or he's going to be one of the greatest emperors in the world. And of course, the father of the Buddha, being an emperor, he wanted his son to be a royal emperor, not a monk. Yeah, the prediction was he would either become an emperor or he would become a monk. So, the father of the Buddha decided that his son would never see suffering and only be exposed to pleasure so he could become the royal emperor. And so he built for him what is called a pleasure palace. And he also actually got him married at a very young age. So he would have the pleasures of family, he would have unlimited pleasure, access to every form of richness there was. But one day, the Buddha convinced his best friend, who was a stable boy, who used to take care of the horses, basically a slave, but his best friend. He said, "Can we go out of the city and actually see the real world instead of the world we are living in?" And so they left. And the first thing that they saw was a very old man. And, in the pleasure palace, they'd never seen old age. So the kid asked his best friend, Chana, the stable boy, he said, "What's that?" And, the boy said, "That's an old man." He said, "Does everybody get old?" He said, "Yeah, if you're healthy, you'll get old one day." So that was that night when they came back. The kid, Gautama Buddha, prince, couldn't sleep. Next day they went out, and this time they saw a person with leprosy. I said, "What's that?" He said, "This has got infirmity. He's totally disabled. It's the decrepitude that comes with old age." He says, "Does everybody get infirm?" He said, "Yeah, at some point, everybody does experience infirmity and decrepitude." They went out a third night, and the third night they saw a corpse being taken to cremation. He said, "What's that?" It's a dead man. He says, "Does everybody die?" He said, "Yes. If you're born, you're going to be die." So now they come back, and this poor kid is totally tortured. He can't sleep. He thought life was all abundance, joy, pleasure, and here he says, there's old age, decrepitude, and death. So he's married, he has a son, and very consciously he makes the choice to leave and go into the forest and engage with monks. And he meets all kinds of monks, and they all have their ideologies and this and that. He tortures himself, he does yoga, he does meditation. Nothing seems right. And then he has an inspiration. He realizes that if you hold on to your provisional ego identity, you're screwed, basically. You'll fight for it to the end. But if you realize, and this is a very famous expression in the Buddha's teaching, that you are not an individual, that you are part of the matrix of life. And he called it interbeingness. He said we are interbeings in the inter-isness. There's no self, there's no individual self. It's a made-up construct. And once you settle into the matrix of interbeingness, then very spontaneously what comes out from you is empathy, because you understand the other, compassion, because you want to alleviate suffering, love in action, and freedom from suffering, because all your suffering comes when you think of yourself. So next time you're suffering, ask yourself, who am I thinking about? And you'll immediately know you're thinking about a hallucination that doesn't exist. So then immediately shift into interbeingness, and he called these divine attitudes. Now, did Buddha believe in God? He never used the word God. Did he believe in the soul? He believed in an awareness that transcends ego identity, but he didn't elaborate on this. So there's a lot of controversy. Is Buddhism even a religion? Is it a philosophy? Is it a cultural mindset? All I can say, it works, because when you let go of your ego, whether it's through hallucinogens or psychedelics or conscious understanding that we are in the matrix of being, and that's all there is, you don't suffer.
All right, Dr. Chopra.
And his wife and his kid became his greatest teachers, the ones he abandoned.
Interesting. Well, I think that's a really interesting note to leave us on, and we can continue the conversation here after we let Dr. Chopra go. But I just want to thank you so much for doing this Q&A and giving us all this opportunity.
And I'm going to send you some material to read.
Yes.
And okay.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes. All right. All right, dudes. Well, that was a lot of fun.
That was an experience.
Yeah, man.
We'll say that.
Yeah, it was fun.
He's a nice guy.
Hi, Sadie.
I'm just trying to, how do I disconnect him? Should be able to, oh, okay, there. Okay, great.